Welcome to this explainer. If you've been watching international relations, the post-Cold War era has basically had this super familiar cast of characters, right? You've got the United States as the dominant superpower, China as the rising challenger, Russia kind of playing the disruptor, and the European Union is this massive regulatory heavyweight. But that whole framework, it's getting pretty outdated. Today, we're diving into a literal monumental geopolitical shift. We're talking about India, moving from what people used to call a sleeping giant to an absolute undeniable global heavyweight. We're going to unpack the whole shebang today, the economics, the tech, the diplomacy, and the military shifts driving this rise. Plus, we'll look at the structural hurdles that could actually slow it all down. Okay, let's dive into this by starting with the most foundational metric of them all, 1.4 billion. Back in 2023, India officially surpassed China to become the world's most populous country. But hey, the real headline here isn't just the sheer size of that number, it's the age. India has this incredibly young workforce right at the exact moment when so many other major powers are rapidly aging out. This massive human capital gives them a staggering demographic dividend. It's literally a massive consumer market and a formidable labor force all rolled into one. So you're looking at a profound shift in exactly where the world's goods are going to be made and bought in the coming decades. And that brings us to how the rest of the world is actually perceiving this shift. The EU reporter recently hit the nail on the head, saying India is no longer an emerging market, but a system-shaping actor. Honestly, that is a huge distinction. We're not just talking about a country with some far-off future potential anymore. We're dealing with a present reality. Policymakers in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and Moscow, they're having to rapidly adjust their assumptions. They're updating their strategies to account for a nation that isn't just playing by the rules of the global system, but is actively reshaping the rules of the game. Let's move to and see how this builds into our first pillar, the economic and digital engine. You really can't become a system-shaping actor without the economic muscle to back it up, right? And India's recent performance has definitely caught global markets off guard. Right now, India is experiencing what government analysts are calling a rare macroeconomic Goldilocks moment. Get this, they hit a massive 8.2% real GDP growth in the second quarter of the 2025-2026 fiscal year. But the truly exceptional part? This super high growth is happening alongside incredibly low retail inflation. It actually dropped to historic lows, sitting right in the central bank's sweet spot. Riding this huge wave of robust domestic demand and structural reforms, India has officially become the world's fourth largest economy. And for sure, they're actively on track to hit that number 3 spot in just the next few years. And this brilliantly illustrates the foundation of it all, the JAM Trinity. That's Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and Mobile. This is the absolute bedrock of India's digital public infrastructure, or DPI. Now, instead of relying on closed, private platforms, India did something different. They built a population-scale public good. We're talking about processing a mind-boggling 1.4 billion digital identities, hooking them up to nearly 580 million bank accounts, and connecting the whole thing through universal mobile access. This triad has literally brought hundreds of millions of people into the formal economy overnight. It modernized welfare delivery and drove just unprecedented financial inclusion. But here's where it gets really fascinating. India isn't just hoarding this tech for itself. They are actively exporting it as a tool of global diplomacy. They've already signed DPI cooperation agreements with 24 different countries. On top of that, their instant payment system, UPI, is fully up and running in 8 countries right now, making cross-border payments a breeze. Oh, and they also built an open-source identity framework called MOSIP, which over 25 nations are currently exploring to set up their own sovereign digital identities. Basically, India is building state capacity worldwide. They're proving that digital infrastructure can be a shared global public good, fundamentally changing how nations interact with their citizens and how the global markets you and I participate in actually operate. Which brings us to our second pillar. Let's look at the diplomatic spine, strategic autonomy. So, in this super volatile, multipolar world we live in, how exactly does a rising power navigate relationships with competing giants? Well, the answer comes down to a concept that has jumped from academic theory straight into daily diplomatic practice: strategic autonomy. India is carving this incredibly delicate path between the US, China, and Russia. Strategic autonomy basically means safeguarding your core national interests, things like territorial integrity and economic growth, through issue-based partnerships, rather than locking yourself into blind alliance structures. As India's leadership puts it, it's about being non-West but not anti-West. It's a hard refusal to just get sucked into the vortex of great power rivalries. They're choosing to keep their own agency. So the crucial point here is this clear shift from inherited biases to purely pragmatic interests. Unlike those traditional Cold War alliances where you basically had to pick a side and stick to it no matter what, India completely embraces multi-alignment. They share deep defense cooperation and tech transfers with the United States, and they're active in the Quad to balance China in the Indo-Pacific. But literally at the exact same time, they maintain critical ties with Russia and are major players in groupings like BRICS. It is a highly assertive, purely pragmatic approach shaped strictly by what benefits India.
Through all this autonomy, India has really positioned itself as the preeminent voice of the Global South. During their super successful G20 presidency, they mediated global consensus, championed equitable development, and successfully pushed to get the African Union a permanent seat at the table. But as you can imagine, this diplomatic balancing act isn't totally flawless. Analysts point out that India has faced some pushback from African and West Asian nations over perceived humanitarian gaps, like their somewhat limited aid responses in Gaza and Sudan. It really just highlights the immense pressure of trying to be all things to all developing nations.
Time to shift gears to hard power. Section 3. Upgrading the military shield. Because at the end of the day, diplomacy and economics really need to be backed by hard power. And the sheer scale of India's military, it's staggering. We're talking 1.1 million active personnel in the army alone. This massive force is dealing with a seriously complex security environment. Strategic planners over there are actively preparing for the very real possibility of a two-front conventional conflict, which means facing simultaneous border challenges with both China and Pakistan. And that's while continuously managing internal security and counterinsurgency operations. Having to shoulder that dual burden makes modernizing their military not just urgent, but uniquely difficult. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how rapidly India is transitioning to true network-centric warfare and power projection. We are seeing massive hardware upgrades aimed directly at securing the Indian Ocean. They're expanding their Blue Water Navy with domestically built aircraft carriers. And this is crucial. The INS Arihant nuclear submarine and the Agni V ballistic missile, which has a massive 5,000-kilometer range, finally give India a genuine nuclear second strike capability. On top of that, they are pouring investments into fifth-generation fighter development and space-based surveillance just to ensure they can dominate their strategic area of interest. But it's absolutely vital to understand the intent behind all this buildup. As military analysts are quick to point out, India's military posture is not expansionist. Instead, it's firmly anchored in deterrence, regional stability, and protection of maritime trade routes. Sitting right astride some of the world's most critical sea lanes, India's main goal is just to safeguard freedom of navigation. They want to make sure no single power completely dominates the Indo-Pacific, which makes them a really pivotal, stabilizing actor in the region. All right, time for the reality check. Section 4, Structural Limits and Realities. Because really, no explainer on geopolitics is complete without a rigorous look at the reality on the ground. We have to look at the structural limits that could actually hinder India's great power ambitions. First up is a hurdle rooted in the very thing driving their rise, their population. There's a really sharp contrast right now between India's demographic dividend and its struggle with job creation. Yes, they have this massive young workforce, but their economy remains super heavily reliant on services, and the manufacturing sector is honestly a bit stunted. If India can't generate enough quality manufacturing jobs to productively absorb those millions of young workers, that demographic dividend could easily flip into a vulnerability. It would strictly cap their long-term economic potential. Secondly, researchers are pointing to the major hurdle of domestic protectionism. A perfect example of this is India's decision to completely opt out of the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is this massive free trade agreement in Asia. Driven by domestic fears over tariff commitments and protecting local industries, they basically chose protectionism. And analysts argue that this choice limits India's ability to really deeply integrate into regional markets and global supply chains. And, being embedded in those chains is almost always a prerequisite for true global economic dominance. And this structural limitation bleeds right into their military as well. Despite a massive domestic PR push for Atmanirbhar Bharat, which means self-reliance, the reality is pretty stark. India still imports roughly 70% of its defense equipment. A relatively low-tech industrial base combined with a literal mountain of infamous bureaucratic red tape and procurement means they are still heavily dependent on foreign suppliers like Russia and various Western nations. For a country aspiring to absolute strategic autonomy, relying that heavily on imported military hardware remains a critical vulnerability. Finally, we have to talk about the changing global perception of India's domestic politics. While Western allies have often enthusiastically bet on India as this ultimate liberal democratic counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific, India's democratic credentials are actually coming under increasing scrutiny. A number of global democracy indices and allied nations have raised pretty pointed questions regarding civil liberties and domestic policies. This kind of scrutiny really complicates India's soft power image on the world stage, and it occasionally causes real diplomatic friction with the exact same Western partners it's actively trying to collaborate with.
Which brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask as we watch this huge geopolitical shift unfold. Will India successfully harness its massive demographic dividend, overcome those bureaucratic and economic hurdles, and solidify its status as an undisputed great power? Or will these structural limits, everything from job creation to defense manufacturing, ultimately hold back its full potential in what so many are calling the Asian century? It's an incredibly delicate balancing act, and how India navigates these next few years is going to fundamentally reshape the global order. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on this fascinating global transition.